Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday's Assembly. And all this week, we're thinking about all things seasidey and all things holidays. Yesterday, we really enjoyed the story, The Lighthouse Keeper's Breakfast. And today, we have another seaside story all around what we like to do when we are by the seaside. It's called The Lighthouse Keeper's Tea. So tell me, first of all, have a think, have a talk. When you're on the beach, whether it's somewhere abroad or somewhere in this country, what do you like to do? What do you do to keep busy? Do you like, put your hands up if you like making sandcastles. Me too, definitely. Put your hand up if you like paddling in the sea. Put your hand up if you like eating ice creams. I think we've had a lot of hands up this morning. Put your hand up if you like to surf. Well, where I go on holiday, there are lots of people who enjoy surfing down in Cornwall. And I always watch them every year and think, I wish I could do that. Well, in this story today, Mr. Grinling, who might seem like an unlikely surfer, decides to take up a new hobby. Let's see how he gets on. The Lighthouse Keeper's Tea. Mr. and Mrs. Grinling lived with their cat, Hamish, and his family in a little white house perched high on the cliff. Some days Mr. Grinling was the lighthouse keeper, but other days he just got in Mrs. Grinling's way. Mr. G, you're always under my feet, complained Mrs. Grinling. Mr. Grinling sighed. I'm bored, Mrs. G. Now that Sam helps out at the lighthouse, I haven't got enough to do. Well, as my dad always said to me, only boring people get bored, Mr. Grinling. You need to find yourself a hobby or an interest. A new pastime, said Mrs. Grinling. That's what you need. What do you enjoy doing? Eating, suggested Mr. Grinling. He dipped his finger in the icing. That's it, the perfect pastime. If I like eating, I'm sure I'd like cooking. Mrs. Grinling looked alarmed. Perhaps I could help? No, thank you, said Mr. Grinling. I can do it myself. You have a little rest whilst I make some bread for our lunch. Just pop in these ingredients, mix them about a bit, and hey presto, the bread will be ready in no time. The bread rose and flopped. When Mr. Grinling tried to put it in the oven, the dough slithered everywhere. I don't think I like cooking very much. Much too messy, said Mr. Grinling. Try again then, Mr. Grinling. Find another hobby or another interest. Oh dear, such a pity, said Mrs. Grinling. Well, perhaps something outdoors would suit you better. What about bird watching with your telescope? Oh no, that is a good idea, Mrs. G, agreed Mr. Grinling. I could keep an eye on those pesky seagulls. So he packed a little something and set out. Here's your warm jumper, Mrs. Grinling called after him. Oh no, thank you, said Mr. Grinling. It's a beautiful day. Look at that sun. Well, he didn't see any seagulls, but he did spy 5 green finches, 4 missel thrushes, 3 mallard ducks, 2 black swans, and 1 kingfisher on the riverbank. I'm enjoying this, thought Mr. Grinling. It's a lovely change from seagulls. It was during lunch that he remembered that he didn't like... Let's find out in a second. There's the 1 kingfisher, and the green finches, the thrushes, the mallards, and the swans. I wonder what it is he doesn't like when he's outside. He didn't like cows. Shoo, he said bravely. Moo, mooed the gentle cows. Mr. Grinling scrambled up the tree while the cows finished his cheese, lettuce and tomato sandwiches. He rang Sam. Help, Sam, I'm sure I've just seen a dangerous wild boar. Sam was a bit surprised. A wild boar? Ferocious, said Mr. Grinling. And I'm very cold. Please could you come and rescue me? Well, where are you? Asked Sam. Well, explained Mr. Grinling, I'm up a very thin tree in a field surrounded by a green hedge and a few cows. Good job he had his phone with him, look. Can you tell what kind of bird these are? We've seen them before this year with their beautiful forked tails. Swallows, aren't they? We learned all about them earlier. It took Sam several hours to find him. No more bird watching, said Mr. Grinling. It's far too dangerous with all those wild cows, asked Sam helpfully. But Mr. Grinling was still bored. Dear, he thought, there must be something I enjoy. Well, he tried the violin, but that was too screechy for everyone. And he went out with his kite, but that was too windy. And then was the rollerblading, But that was an absolute disaster. Perhaps old dogs can't learn new tricks, teased Mrs. Grinling. Old? Spluttered Mr. Grinling. Did you say old? Sea dogs like me are never old. Too old to learn new tricks. I just haven't found the perfect one yet. Said Mrs. Grinling. Here it comes. One morning, in Wild Horses Bay, Mr. Grinling met Sam carrying a large board. He was surprised. I didn't know you were a surfer, Sam. Oh, one of the best, boasted Sam. And he rode the big waves until Mr. Grinling watched. I wish I could do that, said Mr. Grinling. Come and have a go, called Sam. Wow, imagine that. The freedom of riding the waves. He pulled Mr. Grinling onto the surfboard. There might be a bit of a problem, Mr. Grinling tried to explain, but Sam didn't hear him. Mr. Grinling stood up on the surfboard and he fell off the surfboard. Swim, shouted Sam. Oh, glugged Mr. Grinling. I can't, he spluttered. That's the bit of a problem. Oh, if you want to be a surfer, that's not a bit of a problem. That's a ginormous problem. I'm an extremely good floater, though, said Mr. Grinling, hopefully. Sam was firm. If you can't swim, you can't be a surfer. Mr. Grinling had made up his mind. Surfing was what he wanted to do most in the world. Don't breathe a word of this to Mrs. G, said Mr. Grinling. She thinks old dogs can't learn new tricks. I'll show her that this one, me, can. Shall I help you with the swimming? Asked Sam. No, thank you, said Mr. Grinling. I know exactly what to do. He found a rock in just the right place and lowered himself into the water. I splash with my arms like this and kick with my feet like this, and then I do both together and... Help! Cried Mr. Grinling. I'm drowning. Oh, that's not the way to learn to swim, is it, children? To learn to swim, you need to do it really carefully, either with your parents or by having swimming lessons, don't you? He floated around the old jetty and through the Needles. He floated beside the white sand beach and over the wreck of the Hesperus. He floated across the channel, rippling with irritable little waves. He floated past the lighthouse and the little white house. At last he floated up onto the beach. Perhaps I do need a little bit of help, he whispered to Hamish as he went to bed. Yes, Mr. Grinling, you do. And this, Mr. Grinling, is exactly the right thing to do. You need to take swimming lessons. Join today, said the notice at the Green Lagoon pool. I've come to learn to swim, said Mr. Grinling. We've got just the class for you, replied the swimming instructor. First, we'll try the kicking. Oh, said Mr. Grinling, and he sank to the bottom of the pool. Now, we'll use your arms, called the instructor. Splash, splash, splashed Mr. Grinling, but he still sank. The children watched. We'll help you, Mr. Grinling, they said, and they did. Soon he could do the doggy paddle, then the freestyle, the backstroke, and the butterfly. Well, congratulations, said the swimming instructor. I always say you're never too old to learn something new. Oh, he's done a smashing job. Now maybe he could try surfing again. Well done, exclaimed Sam. Now I'll show you how to surf. No, thank you, said Mr. Grinling. I'll do it myself. Well, you stubborn old sea dog, said Sam quietly. Mr. Grinling bought a bright yellow wetsuit and a shiny red surfboard. Every day he practised where he thought no one could see him, and every day he fell into the water hundreds, if not thousands, of times. 1001, muttered Mr. Grinling as he scrambled onto the board again. This time I'll do it, he called to the seagulls. I think he needs a helping hand, said Sam. Are you ready for action? What are these children going to do to help him to stay on that surfboard? I think they've had an interesting idea. 7 shark fins rose in the water. Blither me whiskers, shouted Mr. Grinling. 7 sharks surfed beside him, while Mr. Grinling stayed on the surfboard all the way to the shallows. Oh my goodness me, that looks scary, doesn't it? He's surrounded by 7 sharks in the sea. Seems a bit unlikely to me. And 7 sharks climbed out of the water. Well, cried Sam, our shark trick certainly helped an old sea dog learn his new trick. You frightened the life out of me, said Mr. Grinling, but a grin stretched right across his face. Can you see what they did? Looks to me like they had some special shark fins, pretend ones that they attached to their backs. which scared Mr. Grinling so much that he stayed on his surfboard. Well, it wasn't long before Mr. Grinling could ride the waves just like a real surfer. "Now I can show Mrs. Grinling," he announced. "Not yet," begged the children. "We've thought of the perfect occasion." On the day of the Wild Horse Bay Sea Carnival, Mrs. Grinling searched high and low for Mr. Grinling. "Don't understand. He always enters the sandcastle competition and runs in the sack race. Whatever's happened to him? Wherever can he be?" Mrs. Grinling, what do you think now? I think Mr. Grinling's learned something new and he's very, very good at it. "Don't worry," they said, and they arranged a deck chair for her so you can get a better view of the surfing, they'd explained, and they all lined up at the water's edge. As the big wave rose up across the bay, the drums began to roll. Mrs. Grinling watched the little round figure on the surfboard. "Oh, such daring," she exclaimed. "Amazing," she cheered. "Extraordinary," she gasped. I think she's going to realise it's the one and only Mr. Grinling. She's going to be so proud. The figure in yellow surfed almost to her feet. He peeled off his wetsuit and bowed. "I'd like you to meet an old sea dog," he said. Well, Mrs. Grinling was speechless. She gave Mr. Grinling a great big hug. "I did it all myself," he said proudly, with a little bit of help from Sam and the children. "In that case," said Mrs. Grinling, "I think we should have a splendiferous surfing tea." "We'll help if you like," said the children. "Ooh, a surfing tea. That looks rather marvellous, with some fruit and some cakes there. Lots of things to enjoy." I love how these stories always seem to end in a big feast somewhere. And they did. Look at that. What a great ending to that story. Good old Mr. Grinling, proving there that you're never too old to learn something new. You just have to persevere. So that's our sea story for today. I wonder where we'll get to tomorrow. You'll have to wait and see. Have a really nice Tuesday, everybody, and I will see you soon. Bye for now.